Ano nga bang implikasyon ng desisyong ito ng Manila Regional Trial Court?
Himayin po natin yan kasama si Atty. Domingo Cayosa, ang dating Pangulo ng Integrated Bar of the Philippines or yung IBP.
Good evening po, Attorney. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Mian and Ed, at magandang gabi sa nakikinig at nanonood sa inyong programa.
Good evening,
Sir.
sir. Well, sir, yung the court nga rejected the petition for proscription, but at the same time, earlier, na-designate na ang CPP-NPA ng Anti-Terror Council as a terror group. Can you run us through very quickly, ano yung kaibahan ng proscription at yung designation, at anong implication naman nitong pag-reject ng proscription?
Yung prescription ay is a result of a petition by government before a court of law. Yung designation, ginagawa yan ng hindi korte kundi ng Anti-Terrorism Council. At ang basihan nito yung bagong anti-terrorism law. No? Itong decision ng korte ng RTC Manila ay petition under the Human Security Act, yung naunang anti-terrorism law ng ating bansa. Meron akong bagong pinasang batas, though some of its provisions were declared unconstitutional, karamihan ng mga pina-question provision nakalusot naman sa Supreme Court. So, yung designation doon, iba po dito sa prescription na inattempt ng gobyerno sa RTC Manila through using the Human Security Act na nauna.
Sir, just to follow up on that before I pass you on to Mian. Pero sir, kung ma-proscribe ng korte as a terror group ang CPP-NPA, what exactly does that mean to members of the CPP-NPA kung sakaling nangyari yon?
Then they'll be considered and labeled as terrorists, at yung mga legal effects ng being proscribed or considered a terrorist or a terrorist group under the existing laws, which is now the anti-terrorism law, put into effect. No? Pwedeng i-freeze yung mga assets, pwede kang mag-surveillance, at pwede ka ring arestuhin ng mga otoridad.
Sir, meaning mere membership, kung nangyari yung proscription, mere membership in the CPP-NPA automatically qualifies you for arrest.
Oo, kasi terrorist organization na sila eh. Hindi na lang silang ordinaryong revolutionary front o may political agenda, kundi terrorist na sila eh.
Attorney, meron hong parte doon sa desisyon ng korte kung saan meron pang 9 na insidente na hindi dang itinuturing terorismo, kung di rebellion lang daw po ito. I guess yung question ko po ng pagkakaiba nun, paano mo masasabi na yung isang insidente, rebellion, yung isa, terrorism or act of terrorism?
Yun nga hong mahirap na ngayon, ano? But before proceeding any further, we emphasize that the decision of the RTC is not yet final. Sabi ng gobyerno, mag-file ng motion for reconsideration at kung kinakailangan daw mag-aapela. So it's not yet final. But at least the process works. So medyo matagal nga lang, 2018 pa yan, 2022 na ngayon. But anyway, yung medyo mahirap na ngayon ang sitwasyon sapagkat kung masusunod yung paningin ng quest, any organization who will present itself to have a political agenda but commits acts of terrorism, hindi na pwedeng ma-proscribe o ma-designate na terrorist organization. So medyo questionable yung ganun sapagkat ang pinapunish naman is the act, no? Not necessarily the purpose. Also, there's a discussion from published reports dun sa decision ng korte, magkaiba daw yung purpose dun sa means. No? But if you look at the anti-terrorism law, malinaw naman kung anong ibig sabihin ng terrorism. No? Kung ang atake mo sa mga civilian to cause widespread violence or fear, to force the government to do something or to stop doing something, that would be considered a terroristic act. So, yan ang opinion ng RTC Manila. We await the decision of MR, motion for reconsideration, or any appeal before the higher courts of the land.
But attorney, siguro susugan ko lang, but without the declaration na isang terrorist grupo ang CPP-NPA, ano ang magiging epekto sa counter-insurgency program ng gobyerno? Wala. O meron?
Sa tingin ko, wala, no? Tactically, militarily, wala, no? Patuloy pa rin ang security operations nila. Ang pagkakaiba lang siguro dyan, siyempre mas madali ng there will be, in a way, a limitation of the rights at medyo mas shortcut yung mga legal moves nila against the CPP-NPA. No, but on the field, pareho pa rin yan sapagkat hindi man batas ang usapin dun sa field. Gera, nagbabarilan sila. So I suppose the armed forces of the Philippines and all law enforcement agencies patuloy pa rin yung kanilang ginagawa despite this legal setback for government.
Sir, susugan ko lang yung and if I get this right, yung ginamit na reasoning dun sa desisyon na it is not terrorism, it is only rebellion because it's violence for the furtherance or for the purpose of a political agenda. But let me expand it a little bit further. What if it was violence for a religious agenda or any other agenda, like for example, the establishment of an Islamic caliphate as was done by ISIS or IS in the past, and they were clearly labeled by everybody as a terror group. So, what would the difference be? Saan magkakaroon ng paghihimay o pagkakaiba?
Well, that will be clarified perhaps by the higher courts, sapagkat yung nag-dichotomize, nag-nitpicking yung judge between the means and the purpose. So, if it is brought to higher courts, perhaps we will be guided. Ano ba talaga ang tamang interpretasyon, no? Sapagkat kung titingnan natin, ang emphasis natin yung purpose, anybody can claim a noble purpose but commit terroristic act. So kung yung purpose ang ating pinag-usapan, declared purpose ng isang tao, isang group, baka walang mako-convict ng terroristic act, even if what is doing is really a terroristic act. So it's a little bit problematic. We don't preempt the judge and the higher courts, and we hope that they will sooner than later resolve this with finality para properly guided tayong lahat, lalong-lalo na ang mga law enforcement and security forces of our country.
Because everybody will I suppose, state a justifiable and apparently justifiable reason for whatever they do.
Yes, and they will just put in their constitution or bylaws or whatever, or propaganda, na yung purpose nila is political, no? Will that interpretation hold all the way up to the higher courts? So titignan uli yan, susuriin. Plus, the other thing I'd like to point out is that we have to be careful and take note that this petition for prescription was filed under the old Human Security Act. Meron na tayong bagong Anti-Terrorism Act na question ng marami, including IBP, pero nakalusot naman sa Supreme Court. So ito, kung titignan natin ang batas nito, medyo mas madali para sa gobyerno na kumilos and to label groups or individuals as terrorists. So there's nothing to prevent the government from using this new law rather than the old Human Security Act.
Attorney, ito pong last tanong ko, short and sweet na lang, para sa mga netizens na dismayado sa desisyon ng korte, pinost po nila sa kanilang social media. Siyempre may tanong, pwede ba silang makasuhan ng contempt of court? Gamitin ho namin yung word na yung mga nang red tag kay Judge Marlo Magdoza Malagar.
Well, if it's just a legitimate comment, expressing your sentiment, wala naman. Pero when you start red tagging the judge, that might be considered an act of trying to influence the judge, and that would be contemptuous, no? Kasi hindi naman ho lahat ng expression of opinion or view by anyone. That's part of our freedom of expression. That cannot be curtailed. But if it is meant or it is the effect of trying to scare or influence the judge, for example, lalo ngayon, merong pending magpa-file daw ng MR, o kaya to ridicule the judge or to derail the judicial process, that will be contemptuous at maaari kang ma-cite in contempt. So mag-ingat din ho ang ating mga kababayan sa mga komento. There are legitimate comments as an exercise of the freedom of expression, but be careful that you don't cross the line of contemptuous behavior.
Okay.
Sir, pasingit lang sir. One last question, very briefly sir, a procedural question. Well, clearly there is a new law, the anti-terror law passed in 2020. Itong kasong ito 2018 na sinampa under the Human Security Act. And ibang-iba ang proseso doon sa anti-terror law. Sa anti-terror law, you should have filed proscription petition with the Court of Appeals. Versus this na sa sa Manila Regional Trial Court. I'm wondering na sir, procedurally, where should it go at this point? Ni-reject ng Manila RTC, would or should the DOJ go on appeal to the CA for the same case, or could it go directly to the CA with an entirely new proscription petition under the anti-terror law?
Well, they are filing a motion for reconsideration muna sa RTC kasi hindi pa naman final, and they can appeal sa Court of Appeal. So the process continues all the way up to the Supreme Court, I suppose. But let me just also hasten to caution everyone who would like to make a comment. Yung mga decision ho ng mga hukom natin, mga kababayan, ay base dun sa ebidensya na pinakita sa kanya. So kung yung kaalaman ninyo iba sa kaalaman ng quest, let us not blame the judge immediately, because kung mahina yung ebidensya, kulang-kulang, wala siyang magagawa kundi i-deny o kaya hindi pagbigyan yung petisyon. So hindi ho kasi natin nakikita ang kabuuan ng mga ebidensya eh. So huwag naman agad husgahan yung quest sapagkat hindi naman natin nakita yung mga ebidensyang nailatag sa kanya.
Okay, maraming salamat, Atty. Domingo Cayosa, former President, IBP.